Welcome. I'm here to talk about ecological landscaping, which is landscaping that invites nature back to our properties, to our homes, to our places of work. We treat nature like it is someplace we go visit on vacation, when actually nature is all around us. What we need to do is to nurture nature in whatever piece of land we get to steward, and we do this with gardening. I'm a gardener. I was raised by a gardener who was raised by a gardener. My dad landscaped the home where I grew up. Every year he pruned all the shrubs that he had planted. One of the things I remember doing as a child is when we drive through the ritzy parts of town, we would look at the crazy way they sheared their shrubs into contrived shapes. And we laughed at the effort they were wasting, and we cried at what a harmful things it was doing to these plants, that it didn't make them look good, and it's unhealthy for them in many ways. My sister was the one in the family who grew the annuals around in the planter out front and stuff, and she grew food. She started bringing zucchinis, cucumbers, radishes into the house, and that was great. They tasted better than the stuff from the store, but it was all familiar stuff. And then one day, she brought kohlrabi. And this was different. This was like something that an alien from an alien spaceship. And I realized that when you put seeds in the ground, there's no end to the delights that you can bring to your world. And so everywhere I lived after that, I grew food. Sometimes I grew a lot of food. When I was in my late 20s, I moved to the prairies of southeast Kansas, planning on staying a few months for a temporary job, and stayed for 27 years. When you live in southeast Kansas, you have the opportunity to work with fire because it is an important component to maintaining the land. And sometimes we'd work late into the night because that's the best time to burn, because the herps, the lizards and the snakes and the turtles, they're all hunkered down in little burrows and stuff, and the fire goes over them and doesn't get them. In Illinois, it's illegal to burn at night, which is too bad. They don't really understand. After a few years, I got a job at the local park and zoo. Great 100-acre facility, and I worked there first as a seasonal, helping out with whatever they needed done. When I worked in the gardens, it was always so much work because we were always behind on the weeds. Couldn't catch up. After a while, I got the job running the horticulture operation, and the first thing I did was all those shrubs, or most of those shrubs that had been pruned into those contrived shapes, I got rid of them, so I didn't have to spend time doing that anymore. By August of that first year that I was in charge of things, we caught up with the weeds for the first time. And then I stayed for 16 years, and we continued to make improvements gradually. Sometimes I used native plants, not because I knew anything about ecological services, but because they're wonderful plants. They really are. This is Salvia azuris, blue salvia, blooms late in the summer. Working at the park, I belong to a national zoo horticulture organization, Zoo Gardeners. And through that organization, I met then shed aquarium horticulturist Christine Nye. In 2008, I married Christine, I left the prairies of eastern Kansas, and I moved to northern Illinois, where we started doing things like this. This is our front yard. And this is almost the exact same spot in our front yard, just a few weeks different. This red flower that you see blooming is Silene regia, royal catchfly. It's a great plant. When the butterflies, when we put up butterfly feeders, we never get butterflies on them. After a day or two, we throw out the liquid and we put more in, and we still don't get more butterflies. But when these things bloom, the morning that the first Silene blossom opens, I'll be watching them, and I'll go look at 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun even comes up, and there's a hummingbird. I said butterflies, I meant hummingbirds. There's a hummingbird on the Silene. We just don't get them on our feeders, but they love these things. We do things like this. This is the migratory bird garden at the Shed Aquarium. which is a nice blend of woody plants and herbaceous plants designed for ecological services. It's not all native stuff. This right in front, a little bit to the right, is Calamintha nepeta, which is not native, but it's a rich source of pollen and nectar and is covered with buzzing critters from the 4th of July until the first hard freeze. Good plant that does provide ecological services, even though it came from a different continent and has probably been bred by somebody or another. This is what we call ecological landscaping, which I define as the cultivating of the gifts of the sun. What are the gifts of the sun? Breath, food, and beauty. There you go. Here's the sun using plants to give us breath. An amazing miracle every day. Here's the sun using plants to feed insects. The main way that solar energy is moved from the plant kingdom into the animal kingdom is through the action of insects. Rich source. Pollen is such a high protein, amazing food. And then there's the nectar also. Here's the sun feeding other insects so that they can gather together in the fall and go to Mishwakon for Christmas, which I highly recommend. Here's a beautiful thing. I took this with an iPhone standing in my driveway. That's what happens when you have plants like this growing. This is the sun using plants to feed my family at home. On the left here, this is Cherokee Trail of Tears bean growing. You see the sticks this is growing on? Those are the branches of a dead blue spruce tree. When we bought the property, it's a tiny property, maybe a 1/4 acre, and there was a big blue spruce in the backyard taking up a lot of room, and we just didn't have that much room. So we girdled it, and we use it as a scaffolding for growing food on. It works great. This is the sun using plants to feed baby birds. Most of our songbirds feed their babies almost exclusively caterpillars. A few other things, mostly caterpillars. Most caterpillars have very special relationships with specific native plants. They can't live on anything else. So we need native plants to feed caterpillars, to feed baby birds, or we don't have baby birds. This was popularized. No, here we go. It takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to feed one clutch of chickadees. In like 14, 16 days, they have to catch that many. So they can't travel very far. They have to catch them on native plants that are nearby. These slides are not mine. These are all stolen from Doug Tallamy. Most of the rest of the slides here are mine. Doug Tallamy wrote Bring Nature Home, which introduced the public to this idea about the specificity of caterpillar hosts and the idea that we have to have native plants to have nature in our world. This is the book that you start in this business with. I started someplace else and wasted a lot of time. Should have read this right off the bat. Nature's Best Hope is his latest book. It's about us. We are nature's best hope. What we can do with our properties is what's giving nature a place, because nature is running out of other places to live. We have to provide it in our homes, in our workplaces. We have to. He has another book, The Living Landscape, that he co-wrote. It's also excellent. I'll talk about some other books later. But he had a graduate student, a doctoral student, Desiree Narango, who went into a residential neighborhood, put up chickadee nesting boxes, and then surveyed the woody plant material within the foraging range of each nesting box. And she just specialized on the woody plant material because really that's where most of the caterpillars live. The herbaceous provide for some, but the woodies are the big guns on this. And what she found, because she followed these nesting boxes for 3 years, and she found a very simple relationship. If the biomass of the woody plant material within the foraging range of a nesting box is at least 70% native, then the nest does great. The chickadees grow fast and get out of the nest. If it's less than 70%, sometimes they die, sometimes their feathers grow slowly, sometimes they're underweight when they leave the nest. There are a variety of problems. So you need at least 70%, and that's pretty generous. That leaves plenty of room for growing a lilac, forsythia, something that you particularly love. But it does mean that particularly the big trees have to be native to provide all that biomass. You can't have Norway maples or ginkgos, even though, ginkgos used to live here. That's not going to work. Our caterpillars don't know how to eat them. This is what you find out with the native plants, is that they're not all created equal. And if you will just Google native plant finder, and then where it says set location, you put your zip code in. Here's what you find out about Oak Park, Illinois. The oaks in Oak Park provide food for 456 different species of caterpillars. That's a lot. This pattern holds almost anywhere you go. The numbers vary, but the pattern holds the same. The prunus, the cherries of different types, are also very rich. The willows are great. 299 plus willows early in the season. They flower and provide nectar for bumblebees that are emerging. We're not talking about weeping willow. They're Chinese. Our caterpillars can't do much with them. But what we have best access to around here, there is the black willow, but we also have some nice shrubby willows. We have pussy willow, native pussy willow. This picture I stole from Heather Holmes' Instagram account. Amazing pictures that she posts. She's an expert on native bees and the plants that they live with. This was in March in Minnesota, and this pussy willow is blooming, and there's a bee getting a heck of a meal on there. This is a picture I took of prairie willow here in McHenry County. Beautiful plant. Totally underutilized in landscaping. You need to talk to your suppliers about growing this stuff. It's a great plant. The willows provide so many ecological services. We need to grow a lot more of them. This is the sun using plants to build soil, to replenish aquifers, and to sequester carbon. What's going on here is the sun puts out food on all these root tips. And this food is sugars, fats, and amino acids. Microbes come to these amino acids, all these different foods, they digest them, and what they produce, what these soil microbes produce, is plant growth hormones. I was taught that the plant growth hormones were produced in the root tips, but that was incorrect. They're actually produced in the soil by the microbes, make the plants grow. And then in the winter, when the plants die back, the microbes also tie everything together, and they move nutrients throughout the plant community. They also move information throughout the plant community. There's some great research on this. What happens here is when they die back in the fall, parts of the roots die back also, leaving organic matter in the ground, which opens it up, makes it into a sponge, so the rainwater can go right in and can replenish our aquifers. Over on the left is turf grass. You see what it's doing. On the right is buffalo grass. You can see what it's doing. Big difference. We need the deep-rooted plants so that we can keep the soil open. Every drop of tap water in McHenry County, where I live, comes from the aquifer. So we need a lot of native plants in McHenry County so that we can keep drinking water. Down around Joliet, their aquifers are going dry. They need to change the way they do landscaping around there, obviously. And this organic matter that's left in the ground is all carbon-based, which means we're talking carbon sequestration. When you sequester carbon in a tree, it stays there until the tree starts to decompose, which can be a very long time, and that's great. But when you sequester it in the ground, it stays there possibly forever, depending on other factors. The people from the Conservation Research Institute in Naperville, they've looked into this. They're best known for the work of Gerald Wilhelm, who co-wrote our local Flora of the Chicago area. Gerald is a friendly guy. Here he is visiting with Pete Oldoff. What they found when they looked into this, and you can go to their website and see their numbers, but it's a very simple relationship. When soil is disturbed, carbon is released as carbon dioxide, which is what we don't want. When soil is not disturbed, carbon is sequestered, stays in the ground where we do want it. That's great. This means that if we can even avoid digging a dandelion, we help offset the carbon footprint of other activities. How do we avoid digging a dandelion? By preventing it, not with pre-emergent herbicide, but with things like the design principles in this book by Thomas Rayner and Claudia West, which Doug Tallamy calls the universal how-to guide to sustainable landscaping we have all been waiting for, a masterful accomplishment. And this is true. A year and a half ago, October of 2018, I saw Thomas Rayner do a presentation. And what really caught my imagination about the model that he presented is this ground cover layer, using cool season native ground covers to cover the ground, because that way when the weeds are ready to germinate, they don't have a place. They can't get any sunlight to the seeds, and weed seeds need sunlight to germinate. I heard his talk and I thought about this one client I maintain who never has weeds, and she has the ground covered with ajuga and short sedges and just different ground covers. I'd never thought about that's why there were never weeds there. It's just a beautiful garden. And so I realized that this is really something, and I started looking into this. What are the plants that we can use? Well, pen sedge is a good one. It's short. When you're in a perennial garden or an herbaceous garden, you don't want tall sedges, you want short ones. And this is a great one, real short. It's green early in the season. When the lawns are green, this is green. So it's nice to look at the garden. And these sedges do other things. Gerald Wilhelm calls sedges the keystone species of the oak savanna because in the spring, long before the oaks leaf out, but the ground is very wet. And if those oak roots stay wet for too long, they'll start to decompose. But the sedges are metabolically active, pumping water out of the ground into the air, keeping the oaks alive. And then in the summer, the sedges are dormant, but every night they absorb dew, and it soaks into the ground and waters the trees and waters everything else too. And you can utilize this in your landscaping decisions. Ana Maria Leon, who's a permaculture and community garden activist in North Lawndale, she uses these principles in food forests. This looks like a native shrubland, but it's a food forest. She's using native plants to attract pollinators to increase the yield, and she's using sedges to help with the water situation in her soil. And it works. She has to water less where she has the sedges growing. Other things we can use, this is my favorite for this use. This is prairie smoke, Guium trifolium. Shortly after the snow melts off, this stuff is green. Look, here it is blooming just before the Itea with the penstemons. This is probably late May, early June. The columbines are still blooming. Here it is in April, covering ground, nice and green. Great stuff. This is Packer aurea, golden ragwort. These are year-old plants from seed. These things spread fast. They're short. They bloom early. You can see this picture was taken in April, and they're already putting on flower buds. Going to bloom soon. They don't get very tall. They'll chase around your garden and fill in all the empty spaces between the plants. Great stuff. This is our native violets. They're not going to do a lot of stuff in the soil with as far as roots, deep roots. They're not deep rooted, but this was a shrubland garden that we planted. We decided it's right outside our bedroom window. We decided we wanted a bird garden. And so we're just going to plant a bunch of native shrubs. We didn't do any site preps at all. Later I'll talk about site prep, but we did nothing here. We figured the shrubs would shade out the turf grass. So we didn't even kill it, and sure enough, pretty soon the turf grass pretty much died, got overwhelmed by the violets. It worked really well. I would like to point out this chunk of dead wood in the middle of it. Whenever you can, leave wood to decompose in your garden. It helps the soil. It provides for the microhabitat, for the microbes that live in the soil that help woody plants to grow. So you want decomposing dead wood, just like in the woods. But it also provides places for caterpillars to crawl in and to pupate in the rotting wood. And there are certain species of bees that will build a nest in the rotting wood. This one, chickadees burrowed into and built a nest. And this bird garden is right outside our window. It's the cat's favorite window to sit in to watch things going on. And it's delightful. There are other, that's pretty much where I run out of ideas for the cool season ground covers. But these are some things that my wife has picked up off of the Illinois Botany Facebook page that are blooming in April, and they're low plants that are native. And these all have potential. I have not experimented with any of them, but I encourage people to look at any of these if you have access to them, to try using them as understory plants in your perennial gardens to see what kind of ecological services, how they fill in, how they prevent weeds. But another thing we can do to cover the ground in April, which is what we want, is to look at the seasonal theme plants and consider that some of these can do double duty. The seasonal theme plants are the things like the echinaceas and the liatris and the grasses and different things that will put on shows at different points in the season. But a lot of them cover ground well in April. This is Monarda bradburyana, and a bee balm from the eastern United States. Here it is in April, covering ground. Here it is in May or June, blooming profusely. Here it is in November. This plant provides a long, extended series of beautiful events. This is the grass that you see in the foreground is prairie dropseed. And then the yellow flowers, that's heuchera, our native heuchera, native alum root. Excuse me. These things, here they are in probably June, putting on a show. But in April, in their own ways, they cover ground. That's all the foliage from the previous year's growth of the prairie dropseed is mulching the ground. Didn't have to haul anything in. And then look at that rosette on the heuchera. They'll form a 10-year-old heuchera will have a huge rosette that covers a lot of ground, and that's what we want to do, is cover ground. This is Filipendula, queen of the prairie. My wife calls this plant dancing ladies because it's just so lyrical looking. But here it is in April, covering ground. It's got some pen sedge creeping into it. They're not going to interfere with each other. And the ground, you'll have a place where weeds are not going to grow. On the left is Virginia waterleaf. On the right is Geranium maculatum, I believe. Both of them covering ground in April, which is what we want. Here we have scarlet bee balm, Monarda didmia, or I always get that one wrong. Anyway, here it is putting on a show midsummer, but look at it cover ground, how densely it's covering ground. And it will continue. You see all that bare ground? It will continue covering ground. It'll just go and go until you do something to stop it. And the thing that I'm using to try to stop it is I'm building walls with prairie smoke. Just planting these prairie smokes that you see on the right. Those are divisions I took the year before from the big established patch on the left, because a year and a half ago when I heard Thomas Rayner talk and I figured out what would work, or what I knew would work that I had access to. I had some established patches of prairie smoke, so I started dividing babies out of there and planting them all over the place to fill in. This is shooting stars, which doesn't cover a lot of ground, but it is gorgeous in May. And they reseed, they seed around, you'll get more and more of them. So plant these every time you get the chance. They're wonderful. This is Monarda punctata, spotted bee balm, which is what they call a ruderal species, which means it doesn't live very long, but it produces a lot of seed. So besides the fact that this plant gets covered with all kinds of insects because it produces a lot of nectar and pollen, it also scatters a lot of seed about, and then it dies. And when there's a disturbance in the soil, which brings seed up to the surface, sometimes the weeds that come up are this plant, and I can just leave them to fill in that space where there's been a disturbance. The only place I've ever seen this plant growing in the wild was on a sandbar in the middle of the Wisconsin River. That's how disturbance dependent it is. So you actually have to have some disturbance in your garden to keep this stuff going. This is what it looks like in the wintertime. This is yarrow covering ground in April. And here it is putting on a show later in the summer. Now I'd like to point out that this yarrow is an orange. Our native yarrows are white. So this is a cultivar. And there are issues with cultivars. Some of them are worse than others. The double echinaceas attract pollinators. They come right into them, and they can't get to the nectar or the pollen. And so they waste time and energy, and that's not a good thing. But there are other ones like the Baptisia. Baptisia on the left is a straight species native that we have in our yard, and it gets covered with these bumblebees that crawl right up inside the blooms. The one on the right, which is gorgeous, it's a cultivar also. But the blooms on it, from everything I hear, are a little bit too small for that species of bumblebee. And I watch this plant. I'll sit out and watch it when the other Baptisias are covered with blooms, and this one won't have a single buzzing, a single bee, a single wasp, a single butterfly. Nothing's coming to this. It's really a shame because it's a beautiful plant. This is a hybrid that Roy Diblick developed. It's a cross between Echinacea purpurea and Echinacea tennesseeensis, which is from Tennessee. So this is a little bit of, one of the problems with cultivars is because they're vegetatively propagated, you don't have the genetic diversity, and that's a problem. That makes our landscapes less resilient when you don't have genetic diversity. But in my opinion, bringing in a little bit of genetic information from someplace else, if everybody was growing this kind of echinacea, that might be a problem, but I'm probably the only person around who has one of these because they don't look good in a gallon. This is just 3 plants right here. They're a sprawly plant. They have a strange growth habit for an echinacea, and you're not going to see a lot of them. So, they're give and take with different cultivars, and you have to evaluate them and make knowledge-based decisions about them. Talamy has students do a lot of research at the Mount Cuba Center where they do field trials with cultivars. And they find that the bronze leaf things like the Diablo 9-bark and the black lace elderberry, nothing can eat those. The chemical compounds that produce those colors are just too distasteful, and that's a problem. But the things that are bred for strange growth habits, whether these are dwarf conifers, dwarf weeping conifers, it doesn't seem to affect their palatability. And this is a weeping white pine, eastern white pine on the right here. Eastern white pine is a giant tree, grows well over 100 feet tall. I sure don't have room for one, but they're the host plant for saw cutfly larvae. And saw cutfly larvae are just as good a bird food as caterpillars. So having a white pine is a great thing for feeding baby birds, but I don't have room for one. This thing will grow 20 feet tall and 30 feet wide and provide a lot of shelter in the winter as it gets bigger more and more, and it provide a lot of baby bird food. So if everybody had the same cultivar of weeping white pine, dwarf weeping white pine in the property, that would be a problem because, we wouldn't have any genetic diversity. But I know there are some straight species, great big trees right down the street. And so I know that there is genetic diversity in the neighborhood. And I'm not too worried about this one. So cultivars, you just have to make knowledge-based decisions about them. But whenever you can, go with straight species, local genotypes, please. This is Asclepias sylvatica, I believe. There's 120 some native milkweeds in the state of Illinois. Put as many of them in your garden as you can. They're great plants. Culver's root with swamp milkweed behind it. Very structural, stately looking plant. Lead plant. Look at the bloom on that thing. How did that ever happen? It's actually a shrub. And this is a plant that's not even blooming, but it's beautiful. It's butterfly milkweed. A month after it bloomed, those are all the seed pods, putting on a great show. And then you get the fall color. People talk about burning bush as being beautiful, but it's an invasive species. And this is really beautiful. Really beautiful. These are some sumacs over on the right, obviously cultivars, but great fall color. And then with woody plants, in the fall, after they make all the color change, they drop their leaves. And woody plants are like nutrient and micronutrient mining devices. They're pulling these things up, putting them in the air, and then they drop them back on the ground to feed themselves, to provide nutrition for next year, because it's easier to feed off from the shallow stuff. As it breaks down and works into the soil, they get the nutrients back again. So it's an incredible source of nutrition that you should never get rid of. When they fall on your lawn, what I do is just mow them up. You can't leave them on the lawn because they will kill the grass. Killing the grass is a good thing, but you don't want to kill all of it. And so I just mow them up so that the fines sift down into the lawn. But where they fall in your beds, please do not touch them. This is leaves that I got from my neighbor, and I mowed up with my little lawnmower. The pile on the right is 4 times the amount of leaves as the pile on the left, and I just mulch around in between things with them, scatter them around. But in the beds, I don't touch them, because the beds where the leaves fall and you have the other plant debris are places of treasures. This moth, some of these overwinter on trees, many of them overwinter in leaf litter as pupa. And if you clean out your bed, you get rid of them. These question mark butterfly on the right, they overwinter in leaf debris as adults. So think what a blower or a leaf rake does to one of these things. Just leave them alone. Don't mess with them, because early in the spring, when the trees first start leafing out, these guys are going to lay eggs, or these girls are going to lay eggs, and those eggs are going to grow into the first round of larvae to feed the first round of baby birds. I asked Doug Talmy one time, Doug, what is going on? I've got bird nests all over my yard with baby birds in them, and I haven't seen a butterfly. How can they be getting fed caterpillars? He said, the butterflies get the press, but the moths do the heavy lifting. And it's true. You don't see them, but they're around in the spring. A lot of moths laying eggs. This, as far as cleanup or cutting stuff back, I call it cut back, not cleanup. This is some screenshots out of a video I have of Horacio Suarez taking a great big northwind panicum down to a pile of mulch in 1 minute and 23 seconds. It doesn't take him very much work. All this material gets left there in the bed where it feeds the garden for next year. It doesn't get hauled off and processed and trucked around and hauled back and sold back to the client. It just stays there. And I have this video. These are just pictures from it. But I've showed it to some landscapers. When I show it to them, they get angry because they know the profit margin on all those steps I just talked about. But other landscapers react differently. In particular, Monica Buckley of Red Stem Landscaping. I showed her this video and she asked me for a copy so she could train her guys. And this is on YouTube under Northwind Panicum at Kenshort, Kenzhort. So you can use it to train your guys or your neighbors or whoever you want to train. It took Horacio, there are 10 of these big Northwinds in this bed. It probably took him 20 minutes to clean up the whole bed. There's a lot of other plants too. Cleaned up the whole thing, blew off the sidewalks, good to go till next year. This is spring cutback at the Lurie Garden. The Lurie Garden, let me just talk about it for a minute. People have the idea that this is a garden designed for ecological services. And you know, it was open to the public in 2004, 3 years before Bring Nature Home was even published. And Pete Oldoff, who designed it, who's a wonderful man and a brilliant designer, I doubt he ever used the term ecosystem function or ecological services when he was making his plant decisions. But there's two things I love about this garden, because it's full of native plants because they're beautiful, and that's why he uses our native prairie plants, because they're gorgeous plants, they're wonderful plants, they're tough. But what I really love about this place is, one, there's a endowment for maintenance, and that shows really intelligent intent, that they knew when they started this that it was going to need maintenance, and if you didn't provide for that, then you were wasting your time. And they have not wasted their time here, because the other thing I love about this place is the staff is always looking for ways to improve the ecological services offered by the place. And they learned about, from Heather Holm, they learned about bees using stems, pithy and or hollow stems of plants to lay eggs in. And so instead of mowing everything down with a big commercial lawnmower, when I think of big commercial lawnmower, I think of soil compaction. And instead of doing that, which they have been taught, they started cutting things down by hand. On the right here, this is Roy Diblick, who taught them to use the big lawnmower, taking a picture of this method, learning, because that's what gardeners do. They just keep learning, figuring out there's always better ways to do things. Roy and I have this conversation all the time about how what we were doing 5 years ago seems silly now, and in 5 years what we're doing now might seem silly. But, you know, we just keep learning. These are the tools that I use for maintenance. These Dutch hoes are great. You can be very precise with them and just take out, you know, I work a lot with the tip of the hoe. And so you can work right around plants. You keep them sharp. I use a soil knife and a pruner. I don't have to carry a lot of tools, a big heavy belt or anything. And here's Danielle grubbing out some henbit in the fall. This is late in the season. You don't have to get it all every time. You don't have to pick it up. This plant, if they're going to drop seed, you don't want to leave them in the garden. But if they're not going to drop seed, because this is henbit, which is a winter annual, it's not going to produce seed till the following spring. By tomorrow, those will have dried up, and you won't even know they're there. Just leave them there. Move as fast as you can. Get 90% of the weeds. 100% takes twice as long. Don't waste your time. There's other gardens to go take care of and other things to do. And you don't want to kill everything. This is a place where up above here, we'd planted some sedges and some other plants, and it got really pretty. It was supposed to be pen sedge, but obviously that wasn't what was delivered. Pen sedge is not that big. But one year, because we weren't mulching although you see some residual mulch there. But because we weren't mulching, one year sedge came up down below. And we realized this was an opportunity, and we just left it, and the next year it looked like that. And this is what I call the secret sauce. Volunteer plants, managed properly and let to grow. And you go into something like this and you say, well, where do I start? Well, you start with what you know. See the dandelions? Take the tip of your hoe and cut those off. A dandelion that young, you cut it off a half an inch below the ground. It's dead. You see there's some turf grass coming up. The lawn off to the left was overseeded and some seed got thrown into here. So you have to grub that out. And if you accidentally, while you're grubbing out the turf grass, if you accidentally kill one of these other plants that you don't even know yet what it is, it's okay. There's too many of them. You're going to kill a few. In fact, some of these areas where they're really thick, you want to thin them out. Take out 3/4 of them. These are asters. I know that because the bed right next door is all full of asters. So, you know, by leaving just a few of these, within another year, this is going to be full of big mature aster plants, and your maintenance is going to be down to almost nothing. These are volunteer plants. This is the secret sauce. These black-eyed Susans on the left and all the flowering plants on the right are volunteer plants that came up and just made beautiful combinations that nobody designed. You can use this seeding ID guide. It has great information with pictures of the seedlings, the juveniles. I find that I don't need to use this book, but you know, if you're new at this, it's really comprehensive, has a lot of great pictures and good information, and it's worth owning for sure when you're trying to figure out what things are. Usually, if you just stay in the garden, you look around, you can look at that leaf shape and look at the plants nearby, you can kind of figure it out. But sometimes it's hard, so it's nice to have a resource like this. So let's get started with your garden. The first thing you have to do when you start a garden is prep the site. This doesn't mean a dump truck, it doesn't mean a rototiller, a backhoe, a bobcat, any of those things. It means disturbing the soil as little as possible. You know, Gerald Wilhelm calls soil the shining interface between the heavens and the earth, and you want to respect it. You don't want to mess with it. It's full of these microbes that are they're the hardest workers in your garden, and you don't want to mess with them. You just want to leave them alone as much as you can. But sometimes you have to kill stuff. And if what you have to kill is turf grass, that's pretty easy. I don't recommend using chemicals or sod cutters because if not done properly, you'll have a lot of grass still left in your property. But any of the smothering methods, putting down black plastic and leaving it all summer, or putting down newspaper and cardboard and covering it with wood chips, that'll kill turf grass very effectively. And then you can just plant right into those wood chips. But then you have stuff that's harder to kill, like the persistent perennial weeds and the perennial garden thugs. I'd like to point out I have Canada goldenrod here, which is a native plant. You definitely need goldenrods in your landscape. Goldenrods provide for more food for more species of caterpillar than any other herbaceous plant, any other perennial. So you need to have goldenrods, but they're goldenrods that spread by seed, they're goldenrods that spread by rhizomes. And the ones that spread by rhizomes, like Canada, Missouri, and tall goldenrod, they're very aggressive, and I don't recommend. There are a lot of other kinds. Use them. And these garden thugs, they can be hard to get out. You can do it manually, you can do it with chemicals. They're all hard, they might not work. But one method that really does seem to work, developed by people at the University of Washington, they called it arborist wood chips. And this is just green wood chips from a live tree that was cut down that day and chipped up and then put right on the garden. This is at my neighbor's house. Underneath this pile of chips is almost every species of plant listed on the page before. It's amazing. You see the variegated bishop's weed peeking out underneath. To the right is my garden. And these things are always trying to creep into my yard. I'm always fighting them back. I told the neighbor about this method, and she said, go for it. A couple days later, I heard a chipper truck running. This is the exception to the you don't need a dump truck thing. This chipper truck had to drive around the corner. I went over, talked to the guys. They said, asked them where they had to go to dump, and it was like a 45-minute drive. But they could come right over to this place and dump, save all that carbon footprint from all that driving. And the next day, I just spread this stuff out a foot thick. It's going to get hot, and it's going to cook these weeds. And you have to just leave it and let the wood chips break down. And it might be a year or 2 years before you're going to plant into it. This was a project where I used to work that we did where we planted right into wood chips that had been down for a year. This is after the chips have been down for 2 years. There's no weeds. There were a lot of noxious weeds underneath here. And you just plant right into them. Where are you going to get these plants? I recommend using plugs primarily, and the best place is your native plant sales from wild ones, from your local land conservancies, from your native plant societies, any kind of native plant sale you can find. Buying retail can be a problem. There are some good places, but the other great place to get your plants is neighbors who have native gardens. Because when you have native gardens, you have things that come up volunteer from seed, and sometimes the secret sauce works for you and a plant comes up in just the perfect place, but sometimes you get too much of it and you have to clean it up, which means you have to edit. You have to remove plants that otherwise you would like because they're interfering with the legibility of your composition. And these gardens need to be designed. They need to be composed so that people feel comfortable looking at them. And when you get so many plants that interferes with this, then it's a problem because we win this war with beauty. And if we don't keep the gardens beautiful, then people are just going to say, well, that's a mess. They're going to look at it and say, this was once an award-winning garden, and now it's not. And it's not encouraging anybody in the neighborhood to go with native plants. So this has been noticed by people that you have to edit, you have to remove things. The people at the Conservation at Home program with the Land Conservancy of McHenry County, our friend Sarah McHale runs this program, and in the 5th year she noticed she was getting a lot of phone calls from people with native gardens, and they were saying, Sarah, my garden just isn't as pretty as it used to be. I don't understand why. But I think I have too many plants. What should I remove? And so this year, Sarah's organized an effort where people are going to go around and help each other make these decisions. People with more experience, they're hard decisions. To tear out a plant. I tear plants out of my garden all the time, and every time I do, it gets prettier. And it's hard to learn that lesson. So you need to have people, neighbors, friends, help you with these decisions till you get good at it. When I do this at home, I call my neighbor Jim. He comes with a wheelbarrow. He gets plants. Some of the plants in this garden came from my house. What I really love about this garden about this picture is that his next door neighbor is the person who gave me my original prairie smoke and Virginia bluebells. And that's what gardeners are like. So we need to just garden. We need to divide perennials. We need to collect and share seed. We need to work together and to revolutionize the way we're taking care of our landscapes, because this is what I call the neighborhood ecosystem model of people working together to turn our neighborhoods into ecosystems, coherent ecosystems. And it's driven by the fact that community gardening builds community. And in these days, these sheltered days, it kind of reminds me of a big blizzard. A blizzard twice this size. that brings the world to a stop. A snow twice as deep as the one in this picture, when it's impossible to continue as normal. And when that happens, people work together to push strangers out of dishes or to shovel little old ladies' driveways. And I hope when this is over, whatever that means, we can hold on to this. Because when this is over, we will still be faced with the greatest ecological catastrophe since the dinosaurs vanished. This is for real. We all need to pitch in to help where we can, and we are better at it when we work together. So I'd like to finish with a story that illustrates the change of consciousness that we in the ecological landscape movement have long believed will change our standard landscaping paradigm. The village of Trout Valley, it's a little enclave on the edge of Cary, Illinois, that was once the estate of John Hertz, who started Hertz Rent-A-Car, Yellow Cab, some big city bus lines, big guy in transportation 100 years ago. He put together this beautiful estate, and in the 30s he hired Jens Jensen to design a number of features, including a series of trout ponds, fed by a fen on the hillside off to the left here. A fen is a type of spring. Over time, the property changed hands a couple times. It got subdivided. It's a nice development in there. But the fen got degraded. Honeysuckle, burning bush, their friends moved in, started crowding out the native plants, which affected the quality of water in the trout ponds. So the community realized they had to do something. They collaborated with the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. They put a crew together, and they went to work. And beautiful things happen. There's water running in this picture. Beautiful, clear water. But besides just the beauty, they had educational events. People came, and they heard educators from the Land Conservancy talk about native plants and invasive species and the damage that invasive species do. And I work in Trout Valley, or at least I used to. And, 5 years ago, when I would talk to people about tearing out a burning bush or honeysuckle from their landscape, they just look at me funny. But then people started going to these events, and they started going home and talking to their neighbors, having a burger out on the patio, talking to the neighbors about what they'd learned about this stuff, because they're just taken. You're surrounded by so much beauty, and you hear these words, and it gets to you. And today, on these properties where I work in Trout Valley, the client brings up the idea of tearing out the burning bush or the honeysuckle. And this is this transition, this change of consciousness that we've been waiting for. And it happened because of this community effort. That isn't what they were trying to accomplish, but it is something that they did accomplish with these native plants, working with the native plants in a community effort, because community gardening builds community. And I really think that we can, by working together in our neighborhoods, in our communities, together, we can transform residential America into a place that supports nature, because it has to happen someplace, and there's a lot of places where it isn't happening. So let's do it at home. Let's bring nature home. And of course, be sure to support lemonade stands. Maybe not this year, maybe not till we all get vaccinated, but these guys, here they are putting it out on their home turf. This is a community operation. Support them. These guys are great. Here's some resources that you might find useful. They're not all directly related to ecological landscaping. The Better Homes and this old Better Homes and Gardens complete guide to gardening. You can still get it online. Used copies of it. Very comprehensive. Some of the information is archaic. A lot of it's remarkably up to date. This isn't all about ecological landscaping. Roy Divlick's No Maintenance Perennial Gardening. It's about perennial gardening. It's a different topic, but he has great design and principles in this book and maintenance principles, and Roy's about the relationships with the plants, and that's very important. So this is important stuff. It's good stuff. Wendell Berry is not about this, but he is about this. Full disclosure, Sue Reed, who wrote one of these books and co-wrote the other one, Energy-Wise and Climate-Wise Landscaping. Sue's my cousin, but Doug Tallamy wrote the preface to the second book, Climate-Wise Landscaping. He says, read this book carefully. And he's right, because there's a lot of good information in it. There are a lot of great online resources. Native Plant Finder, I mentioned. Missouri Botanical Garden. Practically every day, my wife and I refer to this, to try to make a decision about a plant. USDA Plants is useful. Mount Cuba Center, they do great research there. Heather Holmes' Instagram account, Bees Native Plants, I learn something new every week from her. And the things that she has in there that I already know about, she explains better than I've ever heard them explain before. Check it out. Look at who she follows. It'll take you to good places. Roy Diblick, again, I call Roy the plant Yoda. He's got a different relationship with plants, and it's worth following up on. And the Illinois Botany Facebook page is a great site. That list of things that potentially could be used as cool season ground covers, native cool season ground covers, came from postings on the Illinois Botany Facebook page. My wife follows that. I don't. But she tells me things that are in it. And there's a couple of people who are very generous, very knowledgeable. They're like Heather Holm, and they post a lot of great stuff and a lot of opportunities to learn about native plants. And some of them that we don't use in our landscapes, maybe we should be. So thank you. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, suggestions, please get in touch with me. We're all trying to get better at this, to learn more, and just remember, it's all about the plants. Thank you.